Hello. So excited to be with you today for this anatomy talk. I feel like I kept, Sarah reached out to me and was like, hey, do you know Paul's work? Have you ever met him? Do you want to do this conversation with him? And I was like, I don't actually know Paul, but I had seen your work a bunch of times, not through Library Street. I think maybe in Toledo or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think I would love to get to know you better. And so I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you today in your studio. So I guess, my first question for you would be, why do you make? Like, how did you end up here in terms of your artistic practice and your upbringing? Just tell me a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I've been drawing and painting for a long time. Well, mostly drawing. I'd been drawing since I was a child and everything. And then started, then I went to school. I went to BGSU, Bowling Green State University. And that's kind of where it took off. I was like, oh, yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to be a painter. I'd been kind of all over the place trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life, and I didn't really know. And going to school, I started to really understand. It's like, oh yeah, I can definitely do something with this. So I started doing mostly portraiture. More so, like, I've been doing portraiture for a while just because I really enjoy people's faces. I like drawing and painting people's faces. At first it was kind of like I wanted to conquer that skill of being able to like draw somebody's face, in a correct manner type of way. And then it just kind of went on to like, oh, I can kind of do my own thing with this. I can draw somebody's face and kind of put my own spin on it. So yeah, I've been pretty much all around and just making work.
Yeah.
So.
Did you like go? Do you have a traditional sort of educational history in that, like straight from undergrad or straight from high school into?
No,
Okay.
I didn't actually.
Yeah. So tell me more about that.
It was very like it was very like different. So I had gone to high school. When I graduated from high school, had really no clue what I wanted to do. I was looking at graphic design, and you know how like they tell artists, it's like if you're into art, you should do graphic design because that'll get you a job. And so I looked at graphic design while I was going to community college. It didn't work out for me very well because I didn't really like sitting behind a computer all day. So I ended up taking some painting classes in community college, some drawing classes. And it started to click a little bit, but then I was just like, I don't know if I can make an actual like living or do anything with this. Ended up going to Los Angeles for a little bit, for 2 years. Tried to kind of move my art there, and that was very unsuccessful.
Yeah.
It didn't work. But I was also not very like forward with my work. I was trying to figure out like where I can show my work. I had no clue to how to do that or what my work was.
Yeah.
And the only show I can remember is I had like a show at like a couple like small like art stores or something like that. And then I ended up moving back to Ohio. And that's when I went to Bowling Green State University because I was like, I think I want to get my bachelor's. This was around 2015.
Yeah.
And I graduated in 2000. I graduated from community college in 2013.
Okay.
So I was out there for a few years, and then I ended up moving back and going to school. So
it's funny how you're talking about, the move from the Midwest to the West Coast and then the sort of return, and how you came to find your practice, it seems like, very much here. And I'm just thinking about what you said about, the pressure to master something and then have to figure out your own relationship to that thing and how you make it your own. And as I sort of think about your work and different art movements, it's rooted in, I also have to like think also about you as a person who's like moved around and like engaged in all these different types of culture. and your choice of materials then becomes really interesting to me, like the crayon. And I keep going back to, your artist statement and things outside of your statement that have been written about your work. And the crayon always seems to be a really important material that, like, I can recognize aesthetically. It's not in this, but
Yeah.
just to say, I can recognize aesthetically, but at the same time, it's so specific to me and a certain cultural vernacular that I'd be curious for you to tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, it's pretty interesting because it's like I went back to the crayon just to kind of go back into like childhood moments. I really wanted a very like bright, colorful drawing tool, and I didn't like using, was it chalk pastel, because I kind of have that like weird sense when you're like rubbing something and it kind of gives you these really weird chills, and I just didn't really like it, so I was not really into it. And then I'd gotten oil pastels, and I was like, oh, these are kind of like adult crayons.
Yeah.
These are like crayons for adults. They have them in, a variety of colors. So I'm just like, okay, I'll start using oil pastels in the works, and I really enjoy the quickness that I can have with the works, and, like I said, like that childlike quality in sort of like an adult contemporary work.
I don't know these people in your paintings, but I feel like there's something so homey about them.
Right.
And so can you tell me a little bit more about, how do you determine a subject? What is it like to be somebody who is capturing a body, a person, a being? And sort of like, how do you navigate both that desire to like adequately represent somebody, but also still represent a part of yourself?
Right. I started doing that when I had people sit for me. So I would do both. I would do like photo reference, and I would also have people sit for me. And one of the reasons I got into that was I was looking at a lot of Buford Delaney. Very amazing painter. I think the first time I actually saw a Buford Delaney work was here at the DIA. I think it's a self-portrait. I can't remember if it's the self-portrait or... no, I think it's a self-portrait of him because I've seen so many of his work. I know he has a lot of work of James Baldwin. So a lot of those paintings are around. So, but I love the sort of vibrant color in the work. I just really enjoyed it. And then kind of going into his history where he would have people sit for him, or he would just kind of be out and about and just like painting what he sees. And that's kind of where I started to get into that. Another one, Henry Taylor, is a current artist that I really, really respect. And I always see his work and he'll have people sit for him. And then I'm like, I need to just have people sit for me, and I need to like paint them or draw them and just see where that goes. So I started doing a lot of that, and just having people sit for you is really amazing because one, it's a challenging thing to just like paint or draw somebody while they're sitting, because not everybody is like a model at school. They're getting paid to kind of do that and everything like that. If you're drawing your friends, you really have to just kind of be like more open to allowing them to like have that space so that they're not like having to feel like a stone, having to be like, oh, you have to sit like really still. So that also gives like a lot of challenge, and I really enjoy that because then you start to capture more soul rather than just this like what a photography, like a photograph, where you would draw or paint a photograph and that photo is just like the still image. You're painting and drawing somebody that's still moving. And to me, I really, really enjoy that like thoroughly. I think that really is just amazing.
So when somebody's sitting for you, how do you sort of engage with them?
What I generally do is like, I mean, it's different for different people. Like some people are talkative, some people like to be quiet. So you kind of have to like see who it is, because like sometimes it's like usually when it's friends we get pretty talkative and I can just kind of, but if it's somebody that I just kind of met, you know, you never know if they're like somebody who just doesn't talk a lot, and you kind of gauge the in between. So I try not to be like, if they don't want to talk too much, I try not to be too like much of a burden. But if it's a friend, I'll like talk their ear off probably.
And I'm curious about this genuinely, like, how do you ask people and why?
You know, it's interesting because it's like when I ask people to sit for me, I try to be very like selective. You know, I'm not like, I don't really kind of go around and just like look. I kind of see like whoever kind of enters my life usually gets picked. So it's like it could be somebody that I'm working with, or it could be somebody that I'm friends with. That usually ends up happening. I think like a lot of people ask if it's like, you know, somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, can you paint me?" It's like, yeah, that never works.
Yeah.
You know, that's just that never works.
So for you, maybe it's more about a personal connection to somebody.
Right.
And I guess sort of going back to what you said about how Detroit has been, it sounds to me like a real big place for you, where you got to engage with art in a different way, maybe. Since you've moved here, can you share a little bit more about what you've been thinking about, what you've been working on? You know, I think that Toledo is 45 minutes away.
Yeah.
So there's like that obvious bit, right? Where it's like we're in a region, a commuter region actually, or commuter corridor. But the decision to be here right now and making this work and connecting with folks.
Yeah, you know, it's. I think for me, I wanted to come someplace that wasn't too busy in a way, but had enough. So that had enough busyness for me to like be able to engage. I had been looking at like going to LA or New York, and for me, I was kind of like, I would go and visit those places, and I love those places, but at the same time, it's like, I keep thinking in my head, it's like, I don't know if I'd be able to like function making work here. I think that I need to find someplace else. And I've always really liked the Midwest, having moved from, because I'm originally from Los Angeles area, and I moved out here when I was like 13 into the Toledo area. And I've always really enjoyed how like calm the Midwest is, and I think that helps with my work, because my work can be pretty calm and like, you know, therapeutic in a way. And I've been really interested in just kind of staying in the Midwest and making work out here. So yeah.
I think what you're saying about the Midwest versus the West Coast is really interesting. You know, as I said, I'm from New York. I actually moved here from the Bay Area, California. Oh, cool. And so there's something that is so unique to the Midwest that I still haven't quite figured out yet. But it maybe has to do with the quiet. But even in terms of thinking about this, like, this quality of your work, and this almost, it could be a snapshot, it could be, and I mean this in the most endearing way, like a coloring book, like a memory, like a precious, like something that is so tender about it. And I think that I see that sort of quality being derivative of the Midwest in a way that, even though, yes, the flamboyancy and the Gucci sweater, like, that's its own thing. But I still feel like the subtle nature in which you are sort of dealing with both the self and others around you is really fascinating to me. And I'd be curious as to what you've been working on recently that you're kind of excited about in terms of being here, and this way that your career is sort of exploding, and you're out here. You know, what's exciting to you?
Well, right now I've been working on, so mostly when I had first started, it was a lot of the drawings, a lot of the pastels. Now I'm transitioning into back into painting. I had done painting in school, but I had never really done something that like stuck, that I wanted to stick, so I just went to the pastels. Now I'm going back into painting, and one of the things that I've been really finding with painting, at least for me, is it wasn't necessarily just like paint in general, but it was like the way that I would have to make the paint. So I'm using oils, but I'm also like thickening the oils to like a point where it's almost kind of like acrylic a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm using that to kind of like spread onto the canvas when I'm doing these portraits or still lifes, and just, you know, letting it drip, letting it kind of be paint, and just experimenting with that and playing with that. And that's generally what I've been kind of doing, is like working on larger scale paintings with that. So kind of like, I guess you would say like, I guess I'd say it's like more like blowing up the oil pastels into like bigger pieces. I tried using bigger pastels for it, and it's just like, you know, there's not a pastel big enough.
No.
So I'm like, well, I have to go back to the brush, and because you can get some pretty big brushes.
Yeah.
And I just started like mixing up these paints and trying to make them as, you know, thick as possible, and just, you know, spreading them on the canvas. And it started to, you know, emulate the oil pastels quite a bit. So I'm like, okay, I think I have something here.
Is that something that you sort of, have you been mentored through that, or is that something you're just trying to figure out?
That's what I was trying to figure out,
Okay.
because I was just kind of going back and forth with the idea of like, you know, I really like my drawings, but, you know, how can I transition them into bigger pieces without getting too tight, you know, too focused on, you know, the identity, too much of the identity of the piece.
Yeah.
Just, I really want to let the paint be the paint.
Yeah.
So I've been starting to do that with these larger ones.
I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about, for you as an artist, as a painter, you know, when I hear painter, we think a very specific thing.
Right.
And sort of like, what does it mean for you to be a painter? And like, you know, your work is very derivative of like very established, mostly Black painters. And I think that that's important work. And you being in the contemporary landscape, you're adding to that legacy and to that canon.
Right.
But I'm just curious, what does that mean for you, you know, here and now in 2021?
I think for me, I think it means everything.
Yeah.
And it's one thing, and it's just kind of like, I think for me, it means kind of like putting your stamp on the world, you know. Like I kind of want my paintings to be my legacy. I mean, they are going to be my legacy, but that's one of the main reasons that I paint, is kind of like I want to kind of put myself out in the world, and, you know, so when I'm gone, I'm still here.
And what does that, you know, I think you're right. Painting, this is your legacy. It's not anything. It's like, painting for me lies between like sculpture and photograph. It's just this like unruly object that's very contained in a way. And so as you're talking about your legacy, and we look back to all your influences, you know, in terms of the content that we're seeing in the work, I feel like you said you only capture people where there's a personal connection. And so would you then consider your work as a part of a personal archive in a way?
Yeah, I would say in a way it's, you know, it's documentation. It's, you know, you're documenting the now, and that's what a lot of my paintings kind of do, is they document what I'm seeing, and, you know, who I'm around. And so a lot of paintings that I do of people, sometimes it's a lot of artists.
Yeah.
And I've done paintings of artist friends, and just, you know, people that I've met. So it's like, that's, you know, documentation in a way. So it's like, you know, painters have done that for a long time.
Yeah.
And I kind of like the continuation of that tradition.
I mean, it's so interesting, because I feel like portraiture, especially recently, contemporary portraiture, is like the hot topic in the art world right now. And there's this real like push for museums, galleries, institutions to really like think about the legacy of portraiture. And I think, you know, as we sort of embark on this post-pandemic, present pandemic, as we're like sort of like dealing with the future of the art world, I think the portrait is going to continue to be really important as the archive, you know, and sort of a different way to storytell, even if it's just a simple, tiny image. And so seeing your work in that canon and with these other emerging contemporary painters especially, it feels appropriate and timely. And I also, we didn't really touch on the still lifes that you make as much. And I also think those are important, like markers of the now. And you said it best, like you're making work about the now. And so for you, what is the relationship between still life and portraiture?
Well, I think still life, at least for me, it was something that used to be kind of like a burden, because it was like when I was in school, they would set up whatever they could find in their closets, like just glasses or a skull or something. They would just set it all up, and then they put a light on it, and they'd be like, paint this. And you would be like, I don't want to paint this. But they would tell you to paint it anyway. And I think that for me, the whole concept of the still life, when the pandemic happened, I was very careful about being around people, because I was still living with my mom. And I was just like, oh, what do I paint? What do I draw? And then I had a plant in the corner, and I'm just kind of like, I'm just gonna paint this and draw this this plant that I got. So I started painting and drawing a couple plants every once in a while, and I think for me that kind of brought me interest in the still life, and interest in other possible still lifes that I could do.
You have to be wild and unruly, and at the same time very controlled and process oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, most definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I'm kind of very proud to be a Midwest artist. I think that used to be kind of this thing where it's like, oh, you don't want to be a Midwest artist. You want to go to New York or LA or Chicago. Well, Chicago, Midwest, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But it's a lot of people would think that way, and now for me, it's like, no, you can really just do it wherever you want to do. I mean, that's the soul. The soul is in the painting, is in the work. There's soul in places that you want to go to, but I think you have to kind of find your own place. And for me, the Midwest has been that discovery. And
yeah, it's interesting because it's it almost seems like a homecoming of a home that you created here, but then left and then returned. And that homecoming and that need to be here making during this time, I think is really special. That you didn't go to Chicago or New York or California, which places I love, but I also think there's such a diversity in the art world, and being in Detroit, especially being in Detroit right now, I think is special. So I'm glad that you're here.
I totally agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.